Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. It is about that time for Mario Cristobal and the Miami Hurricanes. We expect them to be extremely active in the transfer portal over the next couple of weeks. Want to take an early look at some names in the transfer portal that I think could be very interesting to the Miami Hurricanes. We're going to start at the quarterback position, but I want to first start with, something I think needs to be addressed during this offseason for Miami. And that is the defensive coaching staff, specifically the defensive coordinator. That needs to be addressed, I think, in a really big way. And go back to late August as we were talking about this team and projecting this team going into the 2024 season. Y'all said in the comment section too, we knew there were some personnel question marks in the secondary for Miami. But the way I look at it, there was no excuse for being that bad in the back end of this Miami Hurricanes defense, and largely a defense as a whole that, specifically in the front seven, I think has some real difference makers, some game changers. And it just seemed like a defense that every single week underperformed. They looked not prepared to play. They didn't look like they knew what was going on. A lot of the time, you saw a lot of miscommunication from this Miami Hurricanes defense throughout 2024. Lance Guidry and his future with Miami, I think, needs to be addressed. And we'll probably talk about that as the offseason unfolds. And I think we got to start at the quarterback spot. Now, before we get into it, as always, the Miami Hurricane fans, 2024 has been a blast for me talking this program, and the amount of support y'all continue to show, it's absolutely amazing. I can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's going to be a very busy next couple of weeks for this Miami Hurricanes program, finishing up the recruiting class, getting active in the transfer portal. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear from y'all in the comment section too. What positions, what players would you like to see Miami go out and get? Now, let's start at the quarterback position. Now, how do you live life after Cam Ward? Cam Ward, a home run hit for Mario Cristobal and the staff in the transfer portal, in my opinion, was the best quarterback in the country. This Miami Hurricanes offense, not only numbers wise, but then when you watch them every single Saturday, it to me was the best offense in the country. And I think there's still a lot of bright spots for this Miami Hurricanes offense heading into 2025, but you want to have the conversation of the quarterback position. I know Emory Williams has gotten a lot of positive reviews, even with the injury. It very well could be the answer in 2025. My personal take is you also want to bring in a proven commodity at the quarterback position. Miller Moss just hit the transfer portal earlier today. I think this could be a really good get for Miami. I look at Miller Moss and say he played pretty dang well for USC. They lost a lot of close games. You saw Miller Moss in his first year starting, I might remind you, make some really frustrating turnovers late in games. I think this kid can play. He was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. I thought played relatively solid for USC behind an offensive line that early in the season I thought really, really struggled. And Miller Moss is a guy that if you give him protection and you let him sit in the pocket and go process, I think could be a really, really good quarterback, but not the best extender of plays. I think Miami's going to have a good offensive line next year. I think they're going to be able to block it up for Miller Moss. I think if you give Miller Moss some good protection, some playmakers on the outside, he's not going to be the difference maker that Cam Ward was, but I think he can be a quarterback that you can win a lot of football games with if you make sure you surround him with adequate talent. I bet there's some USC fans listening to this, and I would love to hear y'all's opinion too. The offensive line for USC got better towards the back half of the year, but in the beginning of the year, it struggled in a big way. And I think because of that, Miller Moss struggled a little bit. But I think he can be a winning quarterback at the Power 4 level, given some weapons around him. And I think that conversation, I don't know if you're going to get a Cam Ward for anybody in the transfer portal. Like Cam Ward was kind of an enigma. You're not going to see many quarterbacks at the transfer portal like Cam Ward. Very well could have gone to the NFL draft. Number two, and this would be, in my opinion, maybe the closest Cam Ward you get, Noah Fafita. Extremely good in 2023. Took a dip in the play and production in 2024. I think that had a lot to do with, like, Arizona got a lot of national media attention heading into 2024. New coaching staff. Outside of Noah Fafita and T-Mac, that team was not all that good. And so I think Noah Fafita is a guy that, again, if you can put a good coaching staff around him and put a good team around him, I think you can get back to the Noah Fifita we saw in 2023. And if you get that, that's a quarterback that you can win a lot of football games with in the 2025 year. I would expect Noah Fifita to hit the transfer portal. Not in the transfer portal yet. Would be very surprised if he does not hit the transfer portal. Now, those are some of the quarterbacks. John Mateer from Washington State. There will be some quarterbacks that trickle in that I think are worth talking about, and we'll have that conversation as they come in. The next most obvious position for Miami to address is in the back end, that secondary. And again, this secondary was, largely a disaster for Miami in the 2024 season. And I think when you start looking at potential additions, you want to look at a few different things. One, there's only one player that I look at in the secondary and say I would really feel comfortable playing next year. And guys like Damari Brown could get better. OJ Frederick's really the only guy that I would be like, hey, yeah, he's going to be really good. And you saw some freshman mistakes against Syracuse. That kid was very, very good as a true freshman that wasn't really expected to contribute all that much in 2024. Became, one of the better defensive backs we saw in the ACC. But outside of OJ Frederick, I think you need an overhaul at the cornerback position and the safety position. At the end of the day, you just need competitive depth. It didn't seem like Miami had enough good football players in the back end. You were playing guys like Jaden Harris that really struggled. Michelle Powell, we kind of knew what he was, but we knew he wasn't going to be a difference maker. I thought he was a good veteran presence back there, but we kind of knew he wasn't going to be an All-American safety in the back end. Julian Humphrey, I think, is really intriguing. Former Georgia defensive back that started 10 games for them this year. What intrigues me about Julian Humphrey is you kind of get the best of both worlds. You know he can play at the Power 4 level. You don't start 10 games at Georgia if you can't. But I also think there's a lot of meat left on the bone for Julian Humphrey as a player. This kid is 6'1". He's 200 pounds, runs a 10.55 coming out of high school in the 100-meter dash. Length, size, speed. He checks all the boxes that you want in a boundary cornerback that can play a little bit better man coverage, which was a massive problem for Miami. What you get with Julian Humphrey is a guy that, hey, you bring him in, he probably is at least an average starter. But more importantly, there is some serious upside for Julian Humphrey if he can really put it together as a defensive back. I think he's really intriguing. I think another name that just popped into the transfer portal that I think Miami fans should be excited about, a familiar name, Antoine Jackson. We talked about him last year as a potential addition. Not as good at UCF in 2024. In 2023, as a true freshman at ECU, was freaking awesome, I thought. I think he was really impressive as a freshman. I think this is another guy that I think can give you serviceable reps, but also has a lot of upside as a defensive back as well, was previously committed to Miami, ends up at ECU. I look at him, say that could be another really good addition. And then the last defensive back that I'll mention here, Jaden Mickey from Notre Dame, has played a lot of football for Notre Dame, hasn't really been a consistent starter at Notre Dame, but has been a spot starter as well as a role player at Notre Dame. He can play. He's played over 500 snaps at the Power 4 level. And again, him not starting at Notre Dame, when you dig into that Notre Dame team, one of the best secondaries that we see in the country, they got a ton of dudes back there. I think Jaden Mickey could come over from Notre Dame to Miami, potentially give you a starter, a solid starter, but also could be just a guy that is another quality body for Miami to bring into the back end. What I'm focused on for Miami is you got to add guys that add some competitive depth to the room. There just didn't seem like enough guys that were good enough football players to really elevate that unit as a whole. And so not having that competition, not having that depth was a massive problem for Miami, and it cost them football games in 2024. The last position I want to talk about really quickly is wide receiver. Now, getting into the wide receiver conversation, I do think this could be a position where you're just fine at. You're going to lose some really, really good football players headlined by Xavier Restrepo, but you also have some really talented ball players that are on this team. Guys like JoJo Trader, guys like Nikar, even Ray Ray. The guys that I think can play football just didn't really get the opportunity because that Miami Hurricanes wide receiver was really stinking good in 2024. Eric Rivers from FIU, one of the top players in the transfer portal, over 1,000 yards in 2024, 19 yards per catch. What I love about Eric Rivers, he gives you the verticality. I don't watch a ton of FIU, but before I talked about Eric Rivers, I went and looked at a little FIU stuff. Consistently getting behind defenses, which you love. Like, he gives you that legitimate verticality. but he's also a guy that can separate and operate after the catch as well, which is an important dynamic within this Miami Hurricanes offense. Really productive G5 guy. And these, to me, these are the kind of guys. You can talk about guys like Julian Humphrey, the guys that were really good out of high school and haven't quite put it together at the college level. I like these guys more. And I think there's a proven track record of these kind of guys that got under recruited coming out of high school that now went to G5 and played really well. There's a strong track record of those guys jumping back up to P4 and playing good ball. Eric Rivers could be certainly one of those guys. Another name that I'll throw out there, Kevin Concepcion. Uh, if you're not going to have a Cam Ward back there at running the offense at quarterback, go get a legitimate difference maker on the outside. And Casey Concepcion is that guy. I think we all remember what he did at NC State back as a true freshman in 2023. Now, the production and play kind of reverted back in 2024. I think that was a large part of just you're starting a true freshman quarterback and CJ Bailey back there. He just didn't have the amount of opportunities. This kid back in 2023 was really the only reason NC State was scoring any points. And it's so easy to get this kid involved in the offense. He's a very good route runner as a wide receiver, but he's also a guy that with the football in his hands, that there's not many more dangerous players. And so I think the question is, how do we hold serve at the very least with this offense, losing Cam Ward? It's going to be hard. I think one of the things you could do is, all right, we might not have a Cam Ward back there at quarterback next year. I just don't know if there'll be an opportunity to add that kind of quarterback. We can go put some legitimate difference makers in this offense and maybe get a guy like Miller Moss to come in and run the offense. I think that would be a very good offense for Miami. Last guy I'll talk about on the defensive line, Jaheim Otis. And we've seen Mario Cristobal just whenever he has the opportunity to get difference makers on the defensive line, he's going to go out and try to do so. I don't think this is a huge concern. Like, you lose some names, but you also have a lot of young talent on this defensive line. Obviously, headlined by Ruben Bain, but Armando Blunt, guys like Justin Scott. Thought Ahmad Moten played some really good football towards the back half of 2024. Marquise Lightfoot, Booker Pay. There's a laundry list of young cats on the defensive line. I think that conversation more is, are those guys going to be ready to rock and roll in 2025? And if they are, I don't know how aggressive you have to be on the defensive line, but we've seen Mario Cristobal never shy away from getting difference makers on the defensive line. You can never have enough difference makers, and you can never have enough depth on the defensive line. And Jaheim Otis, although a little rocky sometimes at Alabama, there's some off the field stuff you got to check out. When he's playing and playing well, I mean, this dude is an absolute game wrecker at 6'5", 320. Those are the positions, those are the names that I think is an early conversation starter for the Miami Hurricanes. Now, for the Miami fans, let it fly in the comment section. We're going to circle back to this in a couple of days and, kind of update the list, so to speak. And as inevitably some Miami Hurricane players will hit the transfer portal, we'll get a clear picture of positions and players for Miami to address. We'll sign out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.